Right. So this is part two of the mini series on the King's Indian with the fully locked center. And this game is against Grandmaster Peter Wells from 4NCL tournament in Huddersfield last year. Can't remember what score. I must have been doing fairly well. Maybe I was on two or two and a half out of three. And I was playing Peter in round four. Um, yeah, and this is the first time. Pretty sure this was the first game I've had against a grandmaster in a long, long time. So I played, I played IM Marcus Harvey last year, but I hadn't played a grandmaster since. Gosh, I can't even remember when. I'm sure I must have sort of earlier in my chess career when I was younger, but I can't remember now. Definitely played a couple of people who became grandmasters later, but I don't remember playing a grandmaster at the time. So anyway, this was a big deal for me. I was very excited. Didn't have any expectations for the game other than, I really wanted to make it a struggle at least. Um, and Yeah, we were both happy after the game because he won, and I felt like it had been a good game. And when I was analyzing it, I thought this is actually very instructive. So it's the same line of the King's Indian that we saw in my last video, which was against Dale Cullum. But uh, White handles it differently here. So first of all, he plays the main line and gets a slightly better position. Um, but also he takes a different approach to the center. So this is what makes it interesting. Um, in the last game, we had a fully locked center and all of the play was happening on the flanks. And in this game, White manages to kind of explode the center. So Black is left with the pawns and a bunch of light square weaknesses. So let's get started. So just gone through those moves fairly quickly because they should be well understood, especially by anyone who knows King's Indian, or if you watch my last video, this is how the first 7 moves went. And most of what I know about this variation was from Gawain Jones's book. I've since been starting to learn a bit more independently. But Peter plays the main move here. So Dale played Rook E1 and Bishop F1, which is also one of the main lines. But I think Bishop E3 is the main move. And I played Gawain's recommendation of Queen E7 here. I can't remember why H6 is coming up as a move here. Maybe the engine has suggested this as a different way that Black can play the center in this position. Yeah, this is interesting actually because the engine gives this as the best move, and generally I would have thought that combining F3 and H3 is not so good for White in this structure, but apparently this is completely fine for him, and White continues to have his normal small to medium advantage in the King's Indian here. Maybe I just put this in as an interesting idea to try out in future games. There's another move I've been looking at here, Rook E8, which is covered by... so I've got a new book, so I'm always excited about my new books. It's covered by Richard Palliser, Glenn Fleer, and Yelena Dembo. This is Dangerous Weapons, King's Indian. And they have a chapter or two on Rook E8, which I've only glanced at, so I can't really tell you anything about it, but it looks quite interesting. Basically, the idea is to spend a tempo with this rook to force white to play d5 and clarify the center. And this does actually end up relevant to the game we're looking at. But anyway, I played queen e7, which is Gawain Jones's recommendation. Queen c2, c6. So this is all main moves. And now one option for white here is to play d5 immediately, to which I will respond with c5 with the fully locked center again. But Peter plays rook d1. And basically the rationale behind what white is doing here is that the longer he can maintain the tension in the center, the more beneficial it is for him. And the reason for that is because white has more space. He can make more useful waiting and improving moves than black can. So black would very much like the central situation to be clarified so he can get on with his main plan, which will be, getting this knight out of the way and starting to create some kingside play. But black can't do that while there's still tension in the center. So both sides are waiting, and white has more useful waiting moves. That's the idea. This is actually one of the ways I think that you exploit a space advantage. So here, anyway, I forgot my theory. One of the useful waiting moves for black is h6. And that's what I'm supposed to play here. I haven't gone back to look at the theory of this, so I can't tell you what comes after h6. I presume white can possibly start advancing on the queen side. Or maybe he just, goes ahead and plays d5. I honestly can't remember. I mixed up my lines. So there was another line in which black spends a tempo playing rook e8 and white closes the center, and it doesn't matter, but in this position it's a bit inaccurate. And actually one of the benefits I have for this analysis is Peter Wells wrote this game up in the English Chess Federation journal, and so I have his comments here, which are kind of interesting to read. So he says about the move rook e8, he says, this always feels like something which black should try to avoid in principle, since the rook ideally belongs on f8, supporting the f5 break as soon as white closes the center. It's always important for white to have the release of the tension covered. The main point here being that e takes d4, knight takes d4, rook e8, f3, d5, c takes, knight db5 is awkward for black. So yeah, this is his explanation as to why black can't play to open the center and play d5 here. Okay, so this is extremely logical, and it's the best move. Since I've committed my rook to e8, it's now the right time for white to cash in his advantages and close the center, because eventually he's going to have to do it. So now that I've spent a couple of tempi on c6 and rook e8, d5 seems like the right move. And I go c5. And the engine will tell you it's about +1 here. So black has gone slightly wrong. Not catastrophically, but I'm clearly worse here. Mainly because if I do want to go for my normal plan with f5, this rook may have to find its way back there. So here white is going to go for his standard queenside play. And I go for knight g4, which is actually the top engine move. I thought after the game this might have been inaccurate, and that maybe I should have gone for the more standard kind of king h8, knight g8 plan. But no, apparently knight g4 is good. Bishop g5, f6. bishop d2. And yeah, here I had a long think, and apparently while he was wandering around the tournament, Peter Wells noticed I was thinking for a long time and decided to come back to the board to try to figure out what I was thinking about. And so by the time I actually played my move here, he'd already figured out what it was ahead of time and had been thinking about it for about 10 minutes. One thing that you have to watch here, which it took me a couple of minutes to realize that I was about to blunder possibly, is if you try to trade the dark squared bishop here, then it's a blunder, because white just plays h3, and after bishop takes, queen takes, the knight is trapped. It can't come back here because of the queen. So that's something to watch out for. So what I played after a long think was f5, which I'll do. I'm just going to read out Peter Wells' comments here. This was the product of a long think, during which I began to realize that this very sharp pawn break might be my opponent's intention. What I like about it is that it seeks to make a virtue of the rook being on e8, supporting a sharp push of the e-pawn rather than bemoaning the shortage of cover on f5. The problem is that it is not quite sound, but in practical play at least, attempts at a more direct refutation looked rather risky. So this is one of the reasons I wanted to analyze this game, because there's a few critical moments where you can see how a grandmaster makes decisions, especially since we have Peter's commentary. It's interesting what he says here. So basically what he's saying is that this is a very complicated move. He immediately begins looking for a practical solution. So he says attempts at a direct refutation looked rather risky. So obviously when you're a high rated player and you're looking at a complicated line, you know, he could probably be 90% sure that he's going to calculate the line better than me. But if you're a 2300 rated player playing someone who at the time was only rated 2000, you might not want to rely on your 90% level of certainty about the complications, you know, because at the end of a long calculated line, something can go wrong and you might end up in a dodgy position against a player, you know, who is quite a lot weaker than you and you should beat. So throughout this game, he looks for practical solutions to retain positional control rather than going into sharp tactics, which are probably good for him, but he can't be 100% certain. So I thought that was interesting, that you know, how grandmasters make decisions in situations like this. So what he played was knight g5, which was a very good positional solution, but it does, according to the engine, it does lose a substantial piece of advantage here. So the critical move is e takes f5. And my intention is to play this move. So it gets very sharp. So the only good move for him is knight g5, because basically if he retreats the knight, we're just going to take here. We've won our pawn back, and now we've got a great position. We've absolutely no problems at all. We've freed up. The King's Indian bishop is now very strong. So this is not really an option for white. Knight g5 is the only move, and it's an excellent move. And again, this is the only move that I can play to try to keep some complication in the position. And again, there's an only move for white here. So anything, so if he takes here, for example, I'm now actually winning. So I just takes, and then the knight on g5 is hanging. And the same applies if he plays f takes, knight on g5 is hanging. So he really has to play this. Well, the best option is knight takes f2. And again, you know, I was calculating all kinds of things here. So white can play f takes g6. Um, but again, there's only really one best move here. So he plays bishop takes e3, knight takes d1, queen takes d1, and a couple of moves here. So let's say I play g takes f5, and we get to this position. And I have actually won an exchange here. I'm actually a clean exchange up, but white is almost winning. So the engine gives this plus 1.8 or plus 2.1. It's sort of flicking back and forth at the moment, depending on the depth. But either way, it's almost a winning advantage. But you can understand why someone might look at this position from, you know, however many moves you are, 6 or 7 moves back, and not be 100% sure about the evaluation here. So you could be fairly certain. I'm sure that he looked at this and thought, I've got great compensation for the exchange here. And I was looking at this thinking, well, I'm not sure what's going on here, but I am the exchange up. Evaluation, you know, you have to visualize it, evaluate it, and be sure enough about the evaluation to go into this line. So it's kind of understandable that he might avoid this. So this is why he didn't play the best move, pawn takes f5. So we both basically saw the same line here. And I remember my thought process. I was going, I don't know what's going on here, but it's complicated and it's a bit messy. And it seems like my best chance of creating some play here, because I was aware that I'd kind of strategically gone a bit wrong already. And he looked at it and thought, I'm pretty sure this is good for me, but I'm not 100% sure, so I'm going to avoid it. So he played knight g5, which is marked as an inaccuracy, but I actually think this is an excellent move. This is a positional solution to the problems posed in the opening. So my move is kind of forced. You know, my knight on g4 is kind of in a bit of trouble here, and I don't want to retreat it because, you know, then he's just going to be coming straight into e6. So basically I'm committed. I have to play knight d to f6. And now, excellent move. So this is something that everyone should be aware of. If you're white, if you're a d4 player and you play against the King's Indian in these kind of classical lines, this knight e6 pawn sacrifice comes up a lot. And the whole idea is to get rid of one of black's best pieces. So the light squared bishop in this structure is one of black's best pieces, and he really doesn't want to give it up if he can possibly avoid it. So it gets rid of this guy, and it also clears this incredibly critical square. So d5 is probably white's strongest square in the whole King's Indian position, but he can't use it most of the time because there's a pawn in it. So, you know, everything is all blocked up. So this is a clearance sacrifice. After which he'll be able to make use of the d5 outpost. And so he'll have more than full compensation here. So I captured, which is not the best move. So apparently the best move here is f4. And according to the engine, I'm actually doing okay here. So it's plus 0.8, which is not too far away from what the engine just thinks about the King's Indian in general. So, you know, I guess you could interpret it as the engine saying this is a normal King's Indian position, which is interesting because, you know, instinctively you feel like you can't let a piece like this just sit in your position. I think the idea is that we capture it later. You know, eventually we got to capture this. It can't be allowed to remain here forever. But before we do, we play f4, just basically to reduce the impact on our light squares. Anyway, I captured straight away. And apparently knight b5 here is best, but taking on f5 is very consistent. Basically, what white has done here, if you compare it to the previous game we looked at where we had this fully locked center, white has managed to liquidate almost the entire central pawn mass of his own, and leave my pawns fixed on these dark squares. So at first it seems like black has this big dangerous pawn mass in the center, and it looks like I might have quite good chances here. But if you have very good positional understanding, like a grandmaster does, you know that actually this square is under complete control, and as long as you can hold on to it, white is going to have a big advantage here. So actually it is worth commenting on this pawn takes move, because we have some comments from Peter here. So apparently queen takes f5 is the best move here. So I'll read out his comment. Interestingly, queen takes f5 is perhaps the better move, at least looking at the responses likely to be found by humans. After queen takes f5, g takes f5, white retains some advantage after either knight h3, knight h6, bishop takes h6, or knight b5. Let's play this one out. Knight b5, rook d8, h3, knight h6, bishop takes, knight takes d6. So this is clearly better for white, but black is still in the game. And the engine throws up a really crazy move here as the best. So bishop c1. Hands up if this move would occur to you in a practical game. Like, basically the idea is that white has a choice between knight takes f5, bishop takes b2, or if he plays this, then believe it or not, black is actually, well, equal or very slightly better here, I guess, due to control of the d file. Anyway, this would be slightly better than the game. I thought I had to keep queens on, because I could feel that I was worse. But in fact, this was probably the wrong way to think about it, because one of the reasons I'm worse is partially because of tactical threats to my queen. So one of the things that white is threatening is this family fork idea. And temporarily, I am actually at least, a pawn up here. So I should have been thinking about trying to trade queens. Anyway, so h3, kick the knight out, knight b5. And now I make a proper mistake. The engine gives f4 as the best line here, and then we get knight c7, and I basically offer, it's interesting, I offer this endgame where I will be the exchange down but have good compensation. So if white plays queen takes, knight takes, rook takes, this is probably playable. It does still, white does have close to a winning advantage here, but there's going to be some practical conversion problems here. My knights and my pawns make it very hard for white to make progress in the center. He can probably eventually get around it, start trading things off, play b4. So he's probably going to break through, but it is possible to fight on quite a bit here. What I played was knight e4. So I'm accepting that I'm going to lose the exchange, and the idea is, to try to protect d6, and it felt like making a forward attacking move was the right idea. But in fact, this just makes things harder for me and increases white's control of the light squares in the center. So bishop f3, knight f7. I kind of, believe it or not, knight f7 is the top engine move. The problem is that I can't really put this knight anywhere. So I mean, if I come back here, then this is going to fall, and this may be coming as well. There's also the threat of bishop takes h6, bishop takes, and then maybe rook takes d6. So my position is actually kind of busted here. So there's not very much I can do. We're kind of into the conversion stage here, but it's still very interesting how he goes about it and how he keeps control. So takes, knight c7, queen g6, gets the exchange. And I was still, even though I was aware that I was, much worse or losing here, this is the kind of position where, I can normally cause practical problems for my opponent. And I do have a big central pawn mass. So if there was any way, for example, of getting this knight into d4, then I might be doing okay. So white's next moves are really about keeping control of the situation and stopping me from getting any activity. So king h1 is kind of like probably unnecessary, but he's possibly trying to prepare for, I may want to double on the g file, so it's just a kind of a prophylactic move. I prepare b5. Queen takes. Yeah. This was a good move. So basically, everything he's doing here is about keeping control. So after I take here, the engine move is to simply take the pawn and allow me to take on b2, and then it suggests this plan of rook e3. And then, the rook is going to come in here, and basically white's attack is going to be more powerful than mine. Which, again, is all very well within a grandmaster's calculation ability. But every decision that Peter makes in this game is really about keeping control and not letting me get even a hint of counterplay. So bishop c3 is just a very practical move. Less thought required. And as long as he keeps this square under control, then he's fine. So the only thing he's got to watch, basically, is that I don't somehow manage to get my pawns rolling. So I play queen e6, and what I'm dreaming of, I would love to do this, but I'm not going to have time to do it. So f4, and I'm going to read out his comments again here. Black is not benefiting that much from the b file in itself, but it is imperative to stop black from breathing life into his position with d5. White's next two moves are pivotal to the conversion: create pressure against e5 and maintain the beautiful blockade on the light squares. After this, I just needed to be careful not to blunder something in time trouble. So rook d8, rook d5. Again, just a really beautiful controlling move, probably not even necessary. There's multiple ways he can win. He can push this pawn on to f5. He can even play his queen in here. According to the engine, this is extremely strong. But rook d5 is just completely, it's thematic. If we go back to the theme of the video, which was the fully locked center, I've actually still got my fully locked center, which is completely immobile, and white has gotten rid of all of his and maintained beautiful control of these light squares, which is winning him the game. So The rest of the game is really me trying to create some chances here. Peter was in a bit of time trouble. I'm just looking for swindles here. Sadly, bishop takes c3 here does not work because queen takes c3 is check. So I don't have time to give mate on g2. So knight takes d6. Queen g4, queen f7, queen f3, queen g6. Nearly all over. And here I resigned because either I have to allow the rook trade, or if I go king h7, then the queens are traded. And white is the exchange and 2 pawns up. And so that's the end of the game. So on the surface of it, quite a simple game. No spectacular tactics. And the reason why I wanted to include it is it's a really great example of how white should handle this kind of position in the King's Indian. You know, what's white's dream here? White's dream in that fully locked center position is to achieve what he achieved here, which is to this knight to g5 to e6 maneuver, which then allows him to free up these light squares. And all of this happened if we go back to the position where I made my inaccuracy in the opening. So this was our position here, and this is where Gawain Jones recommends h6. And you can now see the reason for h6, which is that before we do anything, it's going to be always useful to take this square away from white's knight. So h6 is a very useful waiting move, and a good idea for black to play in this position. So that's it. That completes the 2-part mini-series. I really liked Peter's play in this game. I was chuffed that he thought it was good enough to write up for the chess journal. I think this knight bd7 line, so the old main line of the King's Indian, is very interesting, and one of the reasons I like it is because I can play the same way against the fianchetto variation and the main line. But this position is the critical one, and I'm not sure I've yet discovered the best way of handling it. Yeah, more work required from me here, I think. Right. Tomorrow, I'm playing in round 1 of the Bradford 4 NCL Chess Congress. It's a 5-round tournament. I'm taking a half-point bye in round 3 because I got persuaded to play a Yorkshire League game for Harrogate Chess Club. It's an important one against Leeds. So yeah, I'll do a tournament recap. I promise it's not going to be a 3-hour recap this time. Somehow I'll manage to either keep the game analysis shorter or I'll split it up. So that's it. I'll update on that probably next week, and that's it. See you next time.